All right. So, yes.
你我在上课啊。
Where were the 70 rabbis? That's a good question. My assumption is that the 70 rabbis were in Israel at the time. I can't imagine that the 70 rabbis were taken to Greece. But I mean, you know, we never, I don't know, men would never ask that question. It's obviously, you know, a much more insightful question. You know, what were the specifics of this? Where were the 70 people put? And how did he select the 70? And I mean, there's lots of interesting questions about it that probably could be somebody's dissertation somewhere along the line. I'm not sure, but it's an interesting question. Yes. When was the Septuagint written? Okay. You guys are definitely making me work hard today. Okay. Let's see if we can find that out. Okay, we'll place it. So it seems, according to Rabbi Wikipedia, it is estimated that the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, known as the Torah, were translated in the mid-3rd century BCE. And the remaining texts were translated in the 2nd century BCE. I'm talking about the Septuagint, all right, which is the earliest extant Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. I didn't make that language up, but right. So that would be that this was translated during the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. Right. This was translated during the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, which would actually fit nicely, because what happened during the second Beis Hamikdash? What holiday do we commemorate that occurred during the second Beis Hamikdash? The upcoming holiday on the calendar, the next holiday on the calendar, Hanukkah, right? The next holiday on the calendar is Hanukkah. Hanukkah was a holiday instituted by the rabbis to commemorate the victory of the Hashmonaim over the Seleucid Greeks, right? So it makes sense that the Greeks had a period of control during the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. We know that we were able to wrest control, W-R-E-S-T, I think, control of the of Eretz Yisrael and of the Beis Hamikdash away from the Seleucid Greeks, and the Hashmonaim continued the rule of Jewish rule at that time until and Jewish rule continued until the Romans came and conquered and destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. So it makes sense. It would make sense around the 3rd century and 2nd century BCE. Beverly, if your Rabbi Google comes up with anything different, please advise.
It says, moving further down, it says, including the apocryphal.
Never look further down. Right? If it's important, it's in the first paragraph. If it's not important, it's not in the first paragraph, and we don't ask any questions from it. Okay.
It evolves into all kinds of other.
Right. An interesting, right? Obviously, an interesting question. But the bottom line is this pronunciation of Balaam's name as Balaam in English is because the English took it from the Greek, as the English took most things from the Greek. The Greek pronunciation of Balaam was Balaam. Why? Ich weiß nicht. I have no idea why. It is a linguistic peculiarity with the Greek language. Something having to do with how Greeks, the fancy grammatical term is declined, right? not as in refused, but declined as in a declination of their in their grammar. So that's why Bilam became Balaam. But he didn't really become Balaam because his name is Bilam. If you read Balaam as a Balkore, you will be corrected because his name is not Balaam, his name is Bilam. But the English translates it all the time as Balaam because of the Greek. Okay, very nice. Who was he? Who was this Bilam fellow? Okay, so the Torah tells us he was the son of Beor, right? He was the son of Beor, lived in the town of Petor. We'll talk a little bit more about that, which was by the river in the land of Balak's people. Okay. And we also have to talk about why he is delineated with such specificity. But who was he? I mean, who was he in general? You all know the answer to this question. Who was he in general? He was a non-Jewish Navi. So why did God give prophecy to non-Jewish individuals? Might it not have been something that we could say was exclusively the domain of Jews? Jews had prophets. Non-Jews did not have prophets. What's the purpose of a prophet? Oh, so you're already giving me an answer, Shulamit. Hold on a second. Right, what's the purpose of a prophet? The purpose of a prophet is to bring the word of God to the people, right? That's the job of a prophet, whether it's a Jewish prophet or even theoretically a non-Jewish prophet, which would mean that a non-Jewish prophet needs to believe in God. Right? A non-Jewish prophet needs to believe in God. And we're going to see as we go further with this story of Bilam that indeed Bilam had a relationship with God. Bilam spoke to God and God spoke to Bilam. So Bilam was, I mean, when was the last time God spoke to anyone in this room? Or online? I don't know. Right? But clearly Bilam has a certain stature among the non-Jews. The commentary known as the Lekach Tov explains the reason why, which is something that Shulamit hinted at just a moment ago, which is actually based on a Gemara in Maseches Baba Basra. And what is that? I'll read you the words of the Lekach Tov. Mipnei ma nitna nivuah le'umos ha'olam. Why was prophecy given to the nations of the world? Why was this individual Bilam around? Why did God allow there to be? I mean, obviously God imbued him with the power. Why did God imbue Bilam with this power? Says the Lekach Tov, making reference to the Gemara, Kidei litardan liyom hadin. In order to wear out the complaints of the nations of the world when the Yom Hadin comes. When the Yom Hadin comes. In other words, what's going to be the Yom Hadin? So the nations of the world are going to stand before God, as the Jewish nation will stand before God, and God is going to judge us. He's going to judge the Jews. He's going to judge the non-Jews. And what possible excuse will the non-Jews offer? They will say, in the language of the Lekach Tov, Shelo Yomru, so that they shouldn't say, Ilule hayu lanu nivi'im hayinu oskim batorah u'b'mitzvos. In other words, what might the Umos HaOlam say before God? In other words, God says, okay, you guys, you're a bunch of bums. And what would the non-Jewish nations of the world respond by saying? Come on, God, if you had given us a Moshe Rabbeinu, so we wouldn't be the bums that we are. If you had given us a Navi who could speak in the name of God and who we all believed in, we would not be like this, but rather we would have observed Torah and mitzvahs. To which God responds, hello, I gave you Bilam.
But he was flawed.
Was the
He
only
was
one.
flawed.
Okay,
From the beginning.
he says, I gave you Bilam. Okay, now, before we get, right, Raylene is already my right flank here firing away. So before we even get to that, the assumption by the Lekach Tov and the assumption by the Gemara in Baba Basra is that indeed Bilam was a Navi on the level of a Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Which is an incredible kind of statement. And there are even those in the Medrash who want to say that Bilam had greater powers of Nevuah than Moshe Rabbeinu. Where does that come from? What do we say in Yigdal? Is it Yigdal, Adon Olam? No, maybe it's Adon Olam. What do we say in Adon Olam? Lokam b'Yisrael. Is it Yigdal? I'm not sure if it's Yigdal or Adon Olam. They're a blur. Right now, they're a blur for me. All right. Yigdal, right? Lokam b'Yisrael. So a lot of people sing it, right? Lokam b'Yisrael k'Moshe od. But that's not correct. That's not correct. Because the period comes after the next word, which is Navi, right? So it's Lokam b'Yisrael k'Moshe od Navi. That there was never a Navi, that there was never a Navi among the Jewish people like Moshe. Lokam b'Yisrael k'Moshe od Navi is the correct way to read that. Doesn't work with the melody, but it's the correct way to read it. Now, what does the Medrash say? Lokam b'Yisrael k'Moshe od Navi. That among Yisrael, there was never an equal to Moshe. Yeah. However, among the Umos Ha'olam, among the nations of the world, there was. Yeah. And who was that? Who was that equivalent to Moshe Rabbeinu among the nations of the world? That was Bilam. And this leads the Medrash to even say that maybe Bilam was on an even higher level than Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, let me try to repair the damage which has been done over here. So what does Raylene say? Raylene says, what are you talking about? Bilam was flawed. He was motivated by self-interest. He was motivated by money. He was motivated by a hatred of Bnei Yisrael. What kind of Navi is this guy Bilam? Right? Now let's go back to the scenario. It's Yom Hadin. Right? God says to the Umos Ha'olam, you're bums. The Umos Ha'olam respond and say, hey, if you had given us a Navi like Moshe, so we would be observers of Torah and mitzvos. Hang on just a second. We would be observers of Torah and mitzvos. Right? To which God says to them, hey, I gave you Bilam. To which, according to Raylene, and I'm not even at Beverly yet, but to which, according to Raylene, the Umos Ha'olam could respond and say, wait a second, Bilam was a jerk, right? In other words, you're telling us that you gave us someone like Moses? You gave us Bilam, motivated by self-interest, motivated by hatred, motivated by whatever. Okay, so what does it mean? What is the Lekach Tov? What is the Gemara? What is the Medrash thinking when these sources write that Bilam was on the level of a Moshe Rabbeinu, if not greater than Moshe Rabbeinu? Are you going to answer me a question?
I'm going to give you
a response. You're not answering this question. Okay, so hold on just a second. We'll come to that. So what does it mean when the Medrash, the Gemara, the Meforshim say that Bilam was a Navi on the equivalent level of Moshe Rabbeinu or an even greater level? So, go ahead.
Moses was flawed also, as we discussed.
Okay, so Beverly is saying that Moshe Rabbeinu also had his flaws, right? Moshe Rabbeinu, we know, struck the rock instead of speaking to it. He disobeyed God. Some say he did that in order to protect the Jewish people, just like Yonah ran away from going to Nineveh in order to protect the Jewish people. Because they're human beings. All right, Einachinami, this is true. They are human beings. But I mean, if Bilam was a Rasha, then how can we even suggest that he was on the equivalent level to a Moshe Rabbeinu? So let me give a...
Maybe he went, whatever he was, the level through Chumash.
Maybe he got to the level through Tum'ah. All right, so I think what we're saying, I think maybe what you're hinting at is, and I think maybe I can expand on it a little bit, and that is that when we say that Bilam was on the level of a Moshe Rabbeinu, we're not, the Gemara, the Medrash, the Mefarshim, are not suggesting that Bilam was on the moral level of a Moshe Rabbeinu. We're not talking about morality here. We're talking about Bilam was on a communication with God level like Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, the Rambam tells us that in order to be a Jewish Navi, you have to have a certain moral perfection. In other words, to be a Navi, you have to have, you have to have some milas. You have to have, the average guy at Kiddush Club is not going to be a Navi, although I don't know, maybe, right? In other words, there have to be some, according to the Rambam, to reach the level of Nevuah, you have to work on yourself spiritually. You have to work on perfecting yourself spiritually. Obviously, no one ever gets to the stage of perfect, or else I'd be out of a job. But what do we have? We have this idea that, according to the Rambam, you have to be on a high spiritual level in order to be a Navi. But that is a Jewish Navi. A non-Jewish Navi is not what the Rambam is referring to. To be a non-Jewish Navi, you don't have to be on a high spiritual level. To be a non-Jewish Navi, you don't actually have to be on any moral level. To be a non-Jewish Navi, you simply have to meet God's requirements for a non-Jewish Navi.
Which God? Thank you. Which God? Because
Well, there's only one God.
that's right. So
Right? There's only one God. And God allowed this person, Bilam, or it's not like Bilam achieved this level on his own. God allowed this person, Bilam, to communicate with him, and he would communicate with this person, Bilam, and this person, Bilam, had the ability to actually change things in the world. God allowed this to happen, not because Bilam was a tzaddik, not because Bilam was one of the Lamed Vavniks, the 36 righteous people of the world, not even because Bilam didn't talk in shul. God allowed Bilam to reach this level of nevuah for one reason and one reason only. And what was that? So that the Umos HaOlam would not be able to say, there was no one who spoke to us in your name. And God responds and says, not true. There was someone who spoke to you in my name. There was someone with whom I communicated. There was someone who could communicate with me. And that was Bilam. Now, it's true, he might have been a lowlife. Although the jury is still out on whether or not Bilam was a lowlife. I mean, our first reaction, based on what we have learned of this story from all of the years that we've read it in shul, all of the years that we've studied Torah, all of the classes that we've had, our initial reaction is that Bilam was indeed a lowlife. God told him to do X. He managed to do X, changed a little bit. Ultimately, he was going to curse the Jew. In other words, we have lots of things, and we'll come across these things that suggest that Bilam was not of a particularly stellar moral character. All right? And we'll talk about these things. All right? But nevertheless, Balaam occupies an important place in the non-Jewish world, and also Balaam occupies an important place in the Jewish world as well. Raylene, while you're talking, I'm going to get a cup of coffee, okay?
Good.
I'm going to need it. Go ahead.
The whole purpose of this story, though, is to show God's absolute power. Even when the enemies were there, they survived if they believed in God. They're successful. And even though Balaam wants to curse them, he can't do it. And Balaam believed in other deities. He didn't believe in God, even in the end, because he suffered a horrible death. He was punished on every level. Is he being used?
Why do you say Balaam didn't believe in God?
Because
right? We're going to see that when these messengers of Balak show up, Balaam says, I can't do anything until I check with God. He's talking about the same God that we talk about. He's not talking about an idolatrous deity. He's talking about God. And Balaam is talking about God. So he might have believed in other deities as well.
Well, that automatically
right? But
would exclude him from being.
No. It might have explicit. You know what it's like? It's like saying, if he's at University of Pennsylvania and he's at the top of the class. Had he been at YU, I don't know that this really works, but right. In other words, the idea is, yes, among the Umos Ha'olam, he was a Navi, and he had a particular purpose. It doesn't mean he didn't believe in other deities. He obviously employed the Koach HaTuma, the power of ritual impurity, in order to accomplish certain things.
He was a sorcerer.
But all of that notwithstanding, Balaam served a purpose.
Right.
And that purpose was,
what was
the purpose was so that the non-Jewish nations of the world could not claim that they should be excused from their lack of observance of mitzvos because they didn't have a prophet to communicate with them in God's name, as the Jews had a prophet to communicate with them in God's name.
So even after all this is said and done, we'll move from that point. He was punished so horribly because he was such an.
He wasn't punished so horribly. He got killed. He got his head cut off. I mean, I'm not saying. Right? I'm not saying that's not a punishment, but
he also denied a place in the world to come. He had no place in the afterlife.
Okay.
So we're talking.
We have okay.
I'm going in a direction.
Balaam,
I want to understand the purpose of this story.
Okay. So Balaam is a very complex personality, right? I mean, we walk into shul in the morning, every single morning. We walk into shul in the morning and we say the words that Balaam said. Matovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenosecha Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't write that. David HaMelech didn't write that. Balaam was the one who said those words. And we say those words every single day when we come into shul. In other words, Balaam's brachos to Bnei Yisrael came true, right? His brachos, right? He didn't curse Bnei Yisrael. He gave them blessings, and those blessings materialized, right?
Because
So,
Hashem,
what?
Because of Hashem, not his
Correct.
intentionality.
Correct. Who cares about it? In other words, I hear what you're saying, but he's not. In other words, we don't need Balaam's intentionality. We just need Balaam to be an individual who can connect with God, to take away from the nations of the world this particular excuse. Now, Beverly, hang on just a second. The nations of the world will now turn to God, and this is the Gemara in the beginning of Maseches Avodah Zarah. The nations of the world will now turn to God and say, okay, give us a second chance. Right? give us a second chance to do mitzvahs. Give us a mitzvah to do. So what does God do? So this is the Gemara in the beginning of Maseches Avodah Zarah. God says, okay, you got it. Go to the mitzvah of Sukkah. Go to the mitzvah of Sukkah. So what happens? So immediately the non-Jews go. And again, don't ask me questions. Which non-Jews? How many? Where were they? Where did this take place? Where did they go build the sukkah? I don't have any answers to those questions, right? But those questions are not relevant to the message from this Gemara. The Gemara says immediately the non-Jews went and built sukkos, and they sat in sukkos. I don't know that they had fancy meals, right? I don't know, but they sat in the sukkos. What happened? Says the Gemara that God removed the sun from its sheath. Right? What is a sheath? It's a covering, right? Nartika is the word in, I don't know what language that is actually. I'm not sure if it's Aramaic. Nartik is a milah b'ivrit. Ma perusho? It's a kamotik cover. Okay, nartik ze'oto adavar. Okay, so God took the sun out of its cover. What does it mean? God took the sun out of its cover. What does it mean? Yeah. In other words, He made it very hot. He made it very hot, and by making it very hot, what happened to the nations of the world who were sitting in the sukkos?
They left.
Right? They left, correct. Right? They left.
It gets too hot
Right?
in the
It's
sukkah,
hot in the
you go
sukkah, they left. That's that, and there's nothing wrong with leaving. But how did they leave? When they left, says the Gemara, they kicked down the sukkah. Okay? In other words, if I'm Jewish, which I am, and I'm sitting in the sukkah, which I did, and it is blazingly hot, so hot that it's uncomfortable, right? So hot that it's uncomfortable, and I'm down to whatever I can get down to in public, right? And I'm still too hot in the sukkah, I can leave the sukkah. Just like if I'm too cold to sit in the sukkah, I can leave the sukkah. Again, how you define too hot and how you define too cold is a fascinating halachic discussion. So for instance, I might have thought that there were people who were going to come to me over Yantif and say to me, it is too cold to sit in the sukkah. And I will tell you that at one particular day, I had to leave the sukkah. It was during the day because it was just too cold. Right? I couldn't focus anymore. It was just too cold. No, but nobody came to me. But I had a line prepared if they were going to come to me. I was going to say, if you had tickets to a Jets game on the 50-yard line, right? And it was 30 degrees outside, would you go? And what would their answer be? Of course they would go. Of course they would go. And they would sit there for 4 frozen hours to watch the Jets game. I would say, okay, no, you don't have to sit in the sukkah for 4 hours. Sit in the sukkah for 2 hours. Sit in the sukkah for an hour and a half, right? If you can do that, then it's not too cold. But clearly it was too cold for some people. And I understand that, people who are, weakened physical condition or people who are particularly susceptible to cold, it was too cold. And they're allowed to leave the sukkah. Just like if it's too hot, you're allowed to leave the sukkah. Just like if it's raining, you're allowed to leave the sukkah. Just like if the sukkah is infested with bees or mosquitoes, you're allowed to leave the sukkah, right? That's after you've, done trapping everything with the paper cups, right? And that's a whole separate halachic discussion as to whether or not you're allowed to trap bees on sukkahs. But let's put that discussion aside for the time being. So these non-Jews were allowed to leave the sukkah, right? But what happened when they left? They kicked the sukkah. That was an indication that they weren't leaving simply because it was too hot in the sukkah and they knew mitzta'er pater min sukkah, that if you're uncomfortable, if you're suffering, you can leave the sukkah. No, they left because they said, forget this stuff. And that was, a sign that the non-Jews of the world could not deal even with a mitzvah like Sukkah when they were given that. Beverly.
Okay. Another reason for Elam is that to show that he could not put curse on when God didn't want it.
Well, I think that's what Raylene was saying a little bit earlier, that, one can understand the deeper message of this section of Chumash as being God is the boss no matter what.
Right, and he was
Right? No matter what.
for the benefit of.
Maybe good. Yeah. So no, maybe. That's okay. In other words, you can say that Bilam, that even Bnei Yisrael learned something from Bilam. Now that is, of course, assuming that Bnei Yisrael at the time knew about this thing with Bilam. They might not even have known at the time that it was happening, right? Right? They might not even have known about Bilam. Balak knew about Bilam. The people of Moab and the people of Ammon knew about Bilam. But who's to say that Bnei Yisrael knew about Bilam? They might not have known. Maybe they didn't know until after 40 years, and they got the Torah, the complete Torah, and they're reading it. They get up to page 836 in the Art Scroll, and they say, wow, that happened? Could be. We don't know that, but we know it today. So you could say there is something to be gained even for the Jews from Bilam, and that is namely the ultimate supremacy of God's will. That no matter what we try to do to subvert God's will, God always wins, right? We see this message in multiple places. Right, Rabot Machshavot Beladish. There are lots of thoughts in the people's heads. Va'atzat Hashem hi takum. But what's ultimately going to be? Atzat Hashem. What is Atzat Hashem? What God wants to happen. What's the Yiddish expression? Menschen tracht and Gott lacht. Right? I probably corrupted that, but what it means is man, right? Mention, meaning human beings. Tracht. What does tracht mean? Plan. They have all these plans for what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And Gott lacht. And what does God do? He laughs because he knows, right? He knows ultimately, this is a bracha levatala, in other words, God has his own plans. I think there's a common loose translation of that as man proposes and God disposes, which is an interesting, right? But yes, we have multiple examples of where we see that God's will is ultimate, right? The supremacy of God's will is absolute. And, we see that, we will absolutely see that throughout this passage of Bilam as well. I just want to go back to something, an interesting aside. The Gemara in Maseches Avodah Zarah, which says that God hotzi et hachama minartika, he took the sun out of its cover. There is one other time where we have reference, where we have the same language of the sun coming out of its nartika. Anybody know where? What? No.
When Joshua fight with the
When? Amalek?
Joshua fight with the Amalek, and then Moses hold up the sun for delay that.
No, you're saying the same thing, to delay the sun. No, the expression, but I'm glad you're still listening. The expression is, right, used by Abraham Avinu and the Bris Milah, right? After Abraham Avinu had the Bris Milah, what did God do? Hotzi et hachama minartika. That's not the language in Chumash, but it is the language which the Meforshim use, Rashi uses to describe it. He took the sun out of its case, right? So obviously there's got to be some connection between those two expressions, right? Some connection between those two expressions. And there is, and it's a beautiful drasha. and I'm not going to ruin it by sharing it very quickly, but think about what God was trying to prevent Abraham Avinu from doing, and think about what God was trying to accomplish by the Umos HaOlam and what Sukkos is all about. Okay.
Sorry, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Natif is the cover for the sword.
Yes, that's why I said the sheath.
That's the sheath.
It is the sheath for the sword. Correct. Right. That's one of those words, one of those Persian words.
嗯
Okay.
，OK，你上去睡觉吧。
Good. Okay. So we are continuing. So this is one of the reasons why we have this fellow Bilam around. The Gemara says Bilam is there in order to
你
preclude
睡觉啊。
the Umos HaOlam from making this excuse. Okay. Now, obviously, if Bilam's purpose, according to the Gemara, according to the Medrash, according to the Mefarshim, if one of Bilam's purposes is to provide a equivalent to Moshe, so obviously to do that, Bilam has to have some.
Redeeming.
No. Bilam has to have some proof that he is able to do that, right? In other words, what good is a Navi, right? What good is setting up this Bilam fellow as a Moshe equivalent to the non-Jews if he can't produce, right? If he can't actually accomplish things in this world, right? It takes away his credibility as a Navi. And Bilam, indeed, we recognize even in our tradition, right, that Bilam had these kochos. Bilam had these abilities. Bilam was able to curse those people that he was allowed to curse. Now, he didn't curse them against God's will, like we see. He wasn't able to curse Bnei Yisrael against God's will, but he was able to curse others. Why would Balak have come to Bilam if Bilam did not have on his resume ability to curse people, right? Balak read that on the resume, right? Saw that on LinkedIn and said, "This is the guy I need." Right? I need somebody who has the ability to curse. Because what did Balak want? Balak knew that militarily he didn't stand a chance against Bnei Yisrael, because Sichon and Og, who were the military superpowers of the world at that time, were destroyed by Bnei Yisrael. So Balak knew militarily he had no chance. So his only hope was to attack and try to destroy Bnei Yisrael in another way. And what was that other way? By cursing them. Why go to someone who doesn't have a successful track record of being able to curse if you are looking for someone who can curse? Obviously, Balak went to Bilam to curse Bnei Yisrael because Bilam had a track record
It was a fraud.
of being able to curse. So the question is, how was he able to do that? Right? How was Bilam able to curse others, whatever? He had that ability, right? That was an actual ability that Bilam had. How was he able to do that? So here is an incredible Gemara. What does the Gemara say? The Gemara says that one instant every day, God becomes angry.
So we use
One
that.
instant in every day, God becomes angry. Now we know that God is extraordinarily patient. Among the Yud Gimel Midos, Harachamim, the 13 attributes of mercy that we say over and over and over again during this whole Yomim Noraim period is Hashem, Kel Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim. What does Erech Apayim mean? Erech Apayim means patient, doesn't get angry. There is a drasha to be said, right? If we're supposed to imitate God's quality of Erech Apayim, think about that the next time you're in the Everfresh or Shop Delight parking lot. Right? Think about it. Think about it the next time you're at a stop sign and the person in front of you doesn't go, or the next time you get cut out by someone while you're driving, right? Think about, right, Kadosh Baruch Hu is Erech Apayim. How Erech Apayim are we? Right? That's like a great drasha in and of itself. But God is Erech Apayim, of infinite patience. However, there is one instant during the day when God gets angry. Now, why? Why does there have to be one instant during the day when God gets angry?
So
Okay.
to demonstrate his mercy on the people.
Interesting, so that he can demonstrate his mercy on the people.
Because at that moment, he could.
Destroy the people, correct? Interesting idea. I had a different approach. Doesn't mean it's any better necessarily. I had a different approach. And that approach is that there has to be an instant during the day when God is angry in order to highlight the rest of the day when he is Erech Apayim. Meaning, if you are always good and you never ever lose your temper and you never ever, I don't know what, right? You're always good. It doesn't make such an impression. I mean, it's like unreal. It's like unbelievable. It's like, come on, you're not a human being. But if you get angry once in a while, what does that say about your patience all the other times? It's something that was deliberate, right? It's something, it's not like, it's not like you're, I'll give you an example. There are YouTube videos online. I'm not sure where else YouTube videos would be other than online, but there are YouTube videos online that show children who have received a cochlear implant. Right? What is that?
They can hear.
That's where this device is implanted that gives them the ability to hear. And there are YouTube videos of the reaction of these children to hearing for the first time in their lives. Right? Now, we hear all the time, and we don't think twice about hearing. But imagine if suddenly you couldn't hear, right? Or suddenly you couldn't speak, or suddenly you couldn't see, right? And then you regain that sight, or you regain that hearing, or you regain that speech. It would be a whole different perspective. So I'm thinking, and I didn't see this anywhere, which is, I'm thinking that moment of anger, that instant of anger that God has, is to demonstrate to us that the other part of the day when God is not angry is has a deliberateness to it, right? It's not like God can't become angry and that's why he's like this. No, God can become angry. All right, God can become angry, but God overcomes that anger in order to show us and to teach us the midah of Erech Apayim. It's like relationships. Did you ever become angry with someone else in your life? I'm not even going to mention a spouse because it'd be silly of me to ask that question, right? Of course, we all do. We all get angry at significant people in our lives. That's human nature. We all get angry. We even get angry with ourselves. But what are we striving for? We're striving to overcome that anger, right? But when you get in that argument, when you are about to reach the tipping point, when you are about to reach the point where it's like, I'm going to say something that's going to haunt me forever, or I'm going to do something that I'm going to regret forever, right? Right when you get to that point, so we need to have the ability to back off, right? Not to get angry is not a human trait. Not to get angry means you're not a human being, right? Right? Not to get angry means you're not right. Not to get angry means you're not a human being. Human beings get angry. It's built into our makeup. Hashem gave us the ability to get angry. We need to control it. But Hashem gave us the ability to get angry. So, almost we'd say God gets angry to teach us that he's not incapable of anger. He is incapable. He is capable of anger. But all the rest of the moments of the day, except for that instant, God overcomes that anger with his midah of erech apayim. Bilam knew when that moment was. Bilam knew when that instant was. And at that moment, Bilam was able to curse whomever he desired to curse. And that's why his curses were effective. In other words, his curses were effective because he did not reach a moment of God's midah, his attribute of erech apayim, when it came to the world. He was able to reach God at that instant when God became angry. Now, it goes without saying that God allowed Bilam to do that, right? Obviously, this is not something that God didn't want to happen, and Bilam, was able to do it nevertheless. No, obviously God allowed Bilam to reach out to him in that moment in that instant of anger. Now, think about it. This is a very interesting idea. First of all, how did Bilam know when God became angry? I can't tell you, no. Right? I mean, obviously, it's not something that we know, right? Bilam knew it, but it's not something that people know, right? So the Gemara has a suggestion as to, at that instant, there are certain natural phenomena that happen in the world that Bilam was privy to, Bilam was sensitive to. Maybe Bilam knew, Now that makes sense, because if the world exists because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in other words, why is this table here? This table is here because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants this table to be here. Right? If God did not want this table to be here, it wouldn't exist. And the same for everything, and the same for everyone. So it makes sense that at that instant when God becomes angry, and again, God's anger is not like human anger, right? God's anger is controlled, right? It's God's anger. It's not human anger. Human anger is uncontrolled often, right? God's anger, when God becomes angry, it makes sense that there would be a change in this world which is sustained by God's, what I'm looking for, beneficence, okay? That by God's generosity, by his, is that word beneficence, is that the correct word?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay, so obviously there would, make sense there would be some kind of physical change. Most of us are not capable, all of us, none of us are capable of discerning that physical change in the world around us because we're not sensitive to it. Bilam was. Now, God allowed Bilam to be sensitive to it, of course. But because Bilam was sensitive to it, Bilam was able to sort of get his curse in at the time when curses were being accepted in Shammai, if that makes sense. Now, what's interesting, the whole thing is a fascinating discussion, but if you think about it, how long does it take to curse somebody?
Second.
Really? I see people cursing me in the car for a lot longer than a second. Right. So, I'm just joking about that. Right. So, no, obviously, if you're going to curse somebody, you got to formulate the words. You have to, it takes time to say the curse, to pronounce the curse, whatever, right? So, how does it work that Bilam could get all of that in at that instant? Practice, okay. Spoke very quickly, right? He spoke very quickly. But someone to suggest that once Bilam got his foot in the door, so to speak, he was able to keep it open enough to get the curse in, right? To get the curse in. Or others say that once Bilam began the curse at that moment of God's anger, then he could continue beyond that and it would still be effective. Based on this, someone is saying, if you've ever thought about it, that we aspire to daven together with a minyan, what's called tefillah b'tzibur. Now again, that is something that is more incumbent upon men than women. There was a very special woman, and she might be one day listening to this tape, so I won't mention her name, but some of you here might know who I'm referring to. And she never came to shul. So she was once approached, how come you're not coming to shul? She says, I daven all morning long at home. And when they need me for a minyan, they know where to find me, right? Right? So this idea, right? This is tefillah b'tzibur is incumbent particularly on men. There is a value to tefillah b'tzibur even for women. In other words, when women come together as part of the minyan, when women come together at the time of a minyan, they can respond to things that they couldn't respond to otherwise. So you can't respond to Baruch Hu when you're davening at home. You can't say Kedusha when you're davening at home. These are Dvarim Sheba Kedusha that require a minyan. So there is a value for women to be present in davening when there is a minyan. That's tefillah b'tzibur. But it's interesting. In other words, at what point can you say my tefillah was part of tefillah b'tzibur? Let's say that everybody else is davening much more quickly than you, and the entire congregation is halfway finished their Shemona Esrei, and you're ready to start your Shemona Esrei. Does that count as tefillah b'tzibur? So there are those who want to say that tefillah b'tzibur means that you begin your Shemona Esrei with the tzibur, right? Together with it, at the moment that the tzibur begins their Shemona Esrei, the moment the congregation begins their Shemona Esrei, that's when you begin your Shemona Esrei. And actually, the halacha discusses what you might need to do in order to coordinate your own personal davening so that you get to that point. In other words, that's the goal. The goal is not to say Shema with everybody else. The goal is not to say, the brachos of Shema with everybody else. The goal is to begin your Shemona Esrei with everyone else. And there are certain restrictions about what you can do, what you can't do. But that's the goal. Why? For the same reason that Bilam understood. In other words, Bilam knew that if he could get the curse in, the curse could start at that moment of God's anger, so then it will continue to be effective, so to speak. He'll have his foot in the door. And that's the same idea. If our Shemona Esrei begins with the tzibur, we get our foot in the door as part of the congregation. So as long as we daven, it doesn't matter, even if the congregation is long finished. As long as we daven, we still have that cover of tefillah b'tzibur. Okay. My time is up. Everyone have a wonderful week. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, we will see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm still not understanding that. He was on